Dino Crisis, the dinosaur survival horror game loved and adored by fans worldwide who begged for it to be remade, but seems to have been forgotten by Capcom. Or was it? Today, we're going to dive into when we'll be getting a Dino Crisis remake, because yes, we will get one, why it's been taking this long, and just how Dino Crisis became the beloved black sheep of survival horror. Come back with me in time to... When Dino Crisis first released in 1999, it did in fact have the makings of greatness, especially having been made by the man who birthed the Resident Evil franchise, Shinji Mikami. It released to a whopping 2.4 million copies sold, almost as much as Resident Evil's 2.75 million copies, giving itself Capcom's Platinum title status as well as securing a sequel to be made.
So what's the bad news?
And wasting no time to capitalize on this opportunity, Capcom quickly moved on to release Dino Crisis 2 in the year 2000. Which was again released to both critical and commercial success, selling over 1.2 million copies, but this is unfortunately where Dino Crisis' downward spiral began.
Oh, come on.
You see, just prior to Dino Crisis, Resident Evil 2 was released to a resounding 5 million copies, making it one of the best-selling games in the 90s. That was double what either Resident Evil 1 or Dino Crisis sold at release, showing significant amounts of popularity and growth in the gaming world. Therefore, Capcom's interest in developing Resident Evil into a full-blown franchise grew even further. While Resident Evil 2's success was great for Capcom as a company, it unfortunately led to Dino Crisis having some obstacles that it needed to overcome. First, the staff responsible for developing the Dino Crisis games were also the staff responsible for developing the Resident Evil games.
You boys, play nice now.
Dividing their resources and time across two franchises. Then we have Dino Crisis 2, who departed drastically from its survival horror roots and released to only half the sales that its predecessor did. Especially when these same people contributed to making a game that doubled the sales of its predecessor. This led Capcom to make a decision. From here, they took the majority of the staff that was working on both games and moved them to work exclusively on Resident Evil.
Let's split up then.
Which from a business standpoint to Capcom was the one that had more financial promise.
That's how you survive.
Now, they did put a new team in place to develop Dino Crisis games, but that's when things actually get much worse.
Oh man, this is just what I don't need.
In 2002, that new team did release a new game, but it was a spin-off game from Dino Crisis that involved new shooter mechanics with the PlayStation 2 called Dino Stalker, and it was a flop. The game did have a tie-in to Dino Crisis, having characters Dylan and Paula from Dino Crisis 2.
Sit back and watch while we fight for our lives. Making a difference.
But it sold less than 1 million copies, and most fans don't even know that game exists. While on the other side of Capcom, in its continued flow state, Resident Evil continues to knock it out of the park, selling 3.5 million copies with Resident Evil 3 in 1999, 2.5 million copies with Code Veronica in 2000, and then in 2002, selling 5.75 million copies with Resident Evil 0, and up to 5 million copies with the Resident Evil 1 remake that still sells to this day. Then Dino Crisis 3 happened, and our beloved franchise was shelved. Sorry, buddy. But now that decades have passed and Capcom has initiated the remake renaissance that we see today, what can we expect as far as a remake for our beloved Dino Crisis games? Well, we have to wait, and here's why. This is where current details get really important, so stick around and everything will make sense really soon. Promise. Capcom, as we've discussed, is a business, and they're gonna do what makes money. Right now, that is remaking the library of Resident Evil games, but that's a good thing. You see, Resident Evil 2 Remake is the best-selling Resident Evil game of all time, releasing to massive levels of both critical and commercial success. Then, many from that same development team went on to remake Resident Evil 4 to, again, great critical and commercial success, while Resident Evil 3 was not as well received by fans. That's important to know because Resident Evil 3 was developed by a different team of developers. So, Capcom has taken the team behind the remakes of Resident Evil 2 and 4 and made them the dedicated remake team, having knocked it out of the park twice, with fans believing that they not only lived up to the originals, but actually are better than the originals were. That exceeded all expectations from both fans and Capcom alike. So, with this information, where do we go from here and what does it have to do with Dino Crisis? Well, first, according to rumors, is a remake of Resident Evil 0 and Code Veronica, which, coming from this team, I think will be a great success and will likely get VR ports for those games as well. From there, I believe we move on to remake Resident Evil 5 and even Resident Evil 6, as well as possibly the Outbreak files, and I believe that many of those games will get VR ports too. Then, the glory days of the Resident Evil Remake Renaissance will end with their grand finale being yet another remake of Resident Evil 1. This will give Capcom's dedicated remake team tons of practice taking old beloved games and turning them into modern, relevant blockbuster hits in the gaming world. This will also have them fully capable of maximizing the utility of Capcom's RE engine, which is important because creating detail and gore effects on dinosaurs will most certainly be more difficult and challenging than it is on zombies, who are already just kind of grotesque. And this is where we'll get our remake of Dino Crisis. Remember, Resident Evil 2 Remake and this whole remake renaissance only started because us fans were so vocal about wanting it remade that Capcom couldn't ignore it. Then when we showed up in droves to buy Resident Evil 2 and make it the best-selling game in the franchise, Capcom understood what it is that we wanted, and now they also have the resources to deliver. Once all the hubbub of what Resident Evil game deserves to be remade next is done, and the entire library has been remade, we can unite our voices in the final game under Capcom's belt that deserves a remake visit: Dino Crisis. Even if the developers at Capcom aren't excited about remaking a Dino Crisis game, the literal trail of financial success left in the wake of the remakes that we've all bought and consumed over these past few years, and over the next few years to come, will have Capcom at the very least give it a shot. Thanks for watching!